My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lady Baroness Hayman of Alloch and the noble Lord Wallace, and they've already very clearly outlined Amendment 63, to which I attach my name. So in the interests of time, I'm just going to comment on Amendment 66 and 68, both of which appear in my name. And these are advances, derivations, different approaches that arose out of the debate that we had on committee around these issues. And as the noble Lord Wallace just said, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that these are the complete answer, although 68 certainly takes us in the direction that he was referring of reviewing our current situation. But it's an attempt to really raise the issues and continue the debate from committee. So I begin by noting that I owe it to Forbes, the website Forbes, to note that a super yacht on average costs about $275 million. I can't personally attest to that, but we can take that as a ballpark kind of figure to start with anyway. And of course, there's probably quite a few going second-hand at the moment that might make that a bit cheaper. But nonetheless, it's a demonstration of the fact that in our current economic system, the corruption, the extractivism, we have some people in the world who have access to massive sums of money. Now, Amendment 63 and most of the debate around this has focused very much on the issue of foreign influence. Indeed, the noble Lord Wallace talked about bringing influence over our democratic politics. But what my Amendment 66 and 68 do is ask the question is, why should any individual, wherever they reside, have that kind of influence over our democratic politics? So if we look at what a typical political party, one of the two largest parties, particularly perhaps the party that draws the most funds, as the noble Lord Wallace said, spends on a general election, it's about 10% of the cost of a super yacht. It's not quite the small change down the back of the sofa for the oligarchs, but it's not a really large amount of money. And I asked the question in the committee debate, what would happen if either one of our existing large political parties, or any political party, or a new political party was formed where it drew all its funding from one source? One highly questionable source or any source at all. And I note that, for example, we've just had the French election where the far-right candidate who got more than 40% of the vote, Marine Le Pen, got a very large loan from a Hungarian bank linked to President Putin. And if you want to have a look at how this plays out in Australian politics, you might like to look at the role of Clive Palmer in the election ongoing now, since I raised that issue at committee. So this is an amendment developed from the committee work. And of course, we don't have exact parallels to those two examples I've just cited in the UK exactly. Although I do note, looking back over the past decade or so, that Lord Ashcroft in the 2010 election donated about in the run-up to it, donated about 20% of the money that the Conservative Party spent in preparing for and running that election campaign. And I note that in 2021, the Conservative mayoral candidate Sean Bailey received about 40% of his funding from the same source. Now, I'm not in any way casting aspersions about those particular cases. I'm merely asking the question about what happens to our politics when one person is hugely influential, a party is dependent on that one person. So what I have in Amendment 66 is an attempt to say there should be a limit on how much one person can influence a political party. I came up with a figure of 5%. I think that's a reasonable estimate. But this was an issue that was debated at some length, and I debated with the noble Earl Lord Howe, not in his place here today. And the noble Earl did then say to me that he would go away and think about the question of whether one person should be able to donate 100% of the cost of an election campaign for a party or for a major character. And so I give notice to the noble Lord the Minister that I am going to I raised that question again. The noble Earl said he would then go away and reflect on what the maximum percentage should be. Maybe the government doesn't think my 5% is right. But does the government really believe that 100% of a funding for a political party's campaign for a general election should come from one source? Maybe it thinks it should be 50% or 25%. And I give the noble Lord the Minister fair warning that if I don't get an answer to that, I will be bouncing back up again. Now, I'm sure that the government would be likely to say, if it engages with Amendment 66, that this might be drafted differently. I've attempted to address some of the main issues. I'm not going to push this to a vote. I don't believe that I've necessarily found all the answers here, but I do believe there is a really important question that needs to be asked about whether we should limit anyone, not just a foreign resident's, percentage of influence over our parties. Now, of course, some will say, oh, but we have rules about declaring donations, and provided they're followed, and we did do our best, Your Lordship's House did do its best to keep an independent electoral commission overseeing that earlier, voters can use that information to influence their choice. But even if it's all open and transparent, voters have many reasons to make the choices that they do. And elections do need to be funded, which is why I've put down Amendment 68, which is for a consultation, a 12-month consultation on public funding of political parties. And this very much draws on the amendment from the noble Lord Seeker placed at committee, which unfortunately, due to the hour, we didn't have time to have a full debate on at committee. But nonetheless, the noble Lord is putting forward, as he is again in an amended form here, a proposal for how to do this and how to actually get state funding of political parties. I think we can have lots of debates about the nature and the way that should be done. So rather than do that, I've put down this amendment for a review. So I will stop there, but I will remind the noble Lord the Minister that I will be asking him if he thinks 100% of funding for a campaign should be able to come from one source.